Hello, dear one. Welcome to Love M podcast. My name is Marta, and I am a continuous student of life. In my nearly 4 decades of life, I wore a few hats, from a fashion model to a yoga teacher, nutrition coach, transformational game guide, and now a podcaster. But my true passion lies in the evolution of the human soul. On this podcast, I sit down with beautiful human beings from all walks of life to witness real-life testimonies of love, truth, and faith. My hope is that both you and I can learn and evolve from it. Now let's get to it. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Love M Podcast. Today, my guest is Tammy Fleming. She has been a women's minister for over 30 years and is now a grief recovery method specialist and instructor in Grief Recovery Institute. Tammy, hi.
Hi, Marta.
So good to have you here. Thank you for agreeing to this.
Oh, my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Me too. Tammy, would you mind to expand on your story? Tell us who you are and what's your story and how did you come to doing all the things that you're doing in the world?
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, it's a long story because I'm 63, so I will try to condense it. So what was happening, I actually discovered grief recovery. I should have discovered it earlier. A friend had recommended it to me. Actually, a woman in my church had mentioned to me on one occasion, you should read this book. And I said, yeah, I should. And I didn't. And then I ran into her again a year later and she said, did you ever read that book? And I said, no, I didn't, but I should. I know I should. And I never did. But several years later, this is now 2007, I was in my late 40s, and I moved from the United States, where I'm from, internationally again. I've done that many times, and I was heartbroken, honestly. I was just heartbroken. I felt sad, leaving my culture. Here I am again. I moved to England, okay, which doesn't seem like it would be that. I've lived there before. But it was traumatic again. I felt like, every conversation, people hear my accent. Oh, you're not from here. It doesn't matter. That's not what I want to talk about. That's what we wind up talking about. Because as soon as I open my mouth, people go, oh, you're not from here. Mm. And I felt guilty about bringing my son, who was then young. He loved baseball. I brought him to a country where there's no baseball. He left his friends, he broke his arm the first week we're there. I mean, it was just, as all moves are, it was hard. And so I was sad. And not only that, I'm looking around me at my, surroundings, my environment, both my community, my neighbors, and also my job. I had a new post as a women's minister in a faith community, a Christian community. And I just felt like everybody is grieving. Everybody is so sad for various reasons. And I thought, you know what? Let me go dig that book up. And so I grabbed a friend. We went away for a weekend, and there is a book called The Grief Recovery Handbook.
I have it.
Yeah, there you go. Good. It's a good one. That my friend had recommended, right? And I finally went through it and did all the practical exercises in it with my friend. And it was very eye-opening. I found it very eye-opening. I learned a lot about myself just from the really wise and well thought out exercises in the book. But I didn't grasp the whole picture yet, right? Like that was good. I felt like it helped a lot. It sort of settled me, answered my questions for the moment. And then I kind of soldiered on. I did give the book away a lot, and it became a tool that I would use in my ministry, and that was great. But then another sort of level took place about 10 years later, when my son was now grown up and decided he wanted to go to university in the States. And we decided to take a pause, my husband and I, in our vocation, in our ministry. And we said, let's go support you, son, because that's a huge move it was from the middle of England to the west coast of the United States. And so during that time, we moved with him. And during that time, our long range plan, my husband and I, we had spent a lot of time in the Russian speaking world. When my son was born in Moscow, I lived in Moscow for many years, loved Ukraine, loved.
Wasn't it USSR? It was USSR, right?
It was, yes. We moved to the USSR. Yeah, we watched it fall.
Time.
We were there. We were there for the whole, that whole thing. It was amazing. That's another story. But the year that I spent around my son, helping him get grounded and launched, as an adult, moving out of the family home, I decided, okay, we're going to go back to Russia, to the Russian speaking world. I want to find the best possible tool for managing grief and loss and trauma. And burnout was a huge thing among my colleagues at that time. Burnout, grief, loss, trauma, all this. What is out there? What is available? So the year I spent in the United States, I went to seminars, I went to courses, I interviewed people, I went all these and there's lots of stuff on the market, right? There's lots of wonderful, wonderful things out there. And I had a very edifying year exploring all these things, right? Talking to people, amazing people, learned a ton. And what I settled on was this modality that I practice now, the grief recovery method, because in the end, it was the only action program that had a definitive beginning and a definitive end. And it claimed to always work.
I remember that, yeah.
Scientifically evidence-based, scientifically proven to actually provide measurable relief for all of those above conditions, right? Trauma, burnout, grief, loss, whatever. So I thought, okay. I also was looking for something that was not culturally so ethnocentric, right? So American, so Western. It needed to be something that would translate culturally into, the Slavic and post-Soviet culture and the Russian language. So grief recovery ticked all of those boxes, the grief recovery method. So there we go. And so I went and I got trained then as a grief recovery method specialist and began to translate everything into Russian and now into Ukrainian. And that event, that moment when I went back and for the first time in 10 years, under the guidance of a trained specialist, went through these steps again that I had done by myself 10 years earlier. It was, a lot of things were similar, but it was also so much deeper and so much more profound. And what was going on with me then, what I brought to the experience then was my son was 19, and I knew that I was a little bit codependent and out of control with him. If any of your listeners are parents, mothers of sons, you'll maybe relate to what I'm talking about. There's a moment, I think, that's probably universal where a growing young man has to pull away from his mother so that he can be a man, right? I mean, and a really wise friend of mine said, listen, every time you show up, he feels like he's 5 years old. I mean, you can be on your best behavior. He's still going to feel like he's 5 years old next to you for a while. That will change, but right now. So anyway, this was what was going on with us. He was pulling away as he needed to. And in my head, I feel like I understood that. But in my heart, I was just devastated, and I was overly sensitive, and I was afraid, and I was apprehensive, and I was scared, and I could not figure out. I kept saying, where is the switch to turn these feelings off? I don't want to have these feelings. I want to be normal with my son. I love him. I trust him. I want him to feel great when I show up. And I could not do it. I could not find the switch. And so I had a really tough year. And then we moved away from him to Ukraine. And that was devastatingly hard. But what I learned in that experience with grief recovery, working on the relationship with my son, I learned, and it was so surprising to me. So my parents had died decades before, and I was raised an only child. I would have told you, if you had said to me before I did that training. Tammy, you are carrying a significant weight of unprocessed trauma and grief having to do with the death of your parents and many other things that you have not processed. And it is life limiting for you. I would have said, no, I'm not. Really, I'm not. I'm good. I feel like I looked the death of my parents in the face. I feel like God was there and supported me. I felt cared for. No, I'm good. I'm really good. And that's what changed for me. Doing that process with my son, I realized that, oh my gosh, why there's no switch that I can find. Why am I so full of apprehension and overreacting to everything that's going on in my son's life? Even though my brain is telling me, calm down, it's not about you, it's okay. In my heart, I was just, there was dissonance. And I realized, oh my gosh, this is about the loss really of my parents. Here I'm about to move away from my last child, my next closest person, and I'm going to move across the planet. It was all about this. And I don't know what that sounds like. Maybe that sounds crazy, but I swear that's what was going on. So I sat down after I finished that course with my instructor. I sat down and I did the same process with my mom, with my dad. And to date, now I'm working on my 14th relationship. But honestly, when I did my parents, the whole temperature, it wasn't a switch I found, but it was a path that I had to walk that just took the temperature way, 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 way down of all of my, hypersensitivity with my poor son, who was just being a normal kid, he's been a normal kid. And his poor crazy mother, is just losing her mind trying to, be normal with him. And I could not do it. I could not will myself to do it. I had to walk this path. And as I told you, I would have looked you in the eye and say, I don't need to do that. I'm good. And the thing I will just tell you is I did not know what I did not know.
I can relate to that, Tammy. I come across the grief recovery method when the war in Ukraine started. And everything, I assume, not I assume, now I know, because I've read that book as well, that I've been carrying a big load of grief as well. Just unprocessed grief and sadness within me, which I was like, yeah, it's fine because, well, and I want to dive deep into that a little bit later. But the war was that last nail in the coffin that said, no, now you're going to sit down and look into it because we're not moving anywhere. Disabled.
Yeah.
Disabled. Yes. And then right. our mutual friend Slava, he said, well, here's this grief recovery method, and maybe it could help you. And he was helping me as a grief recovery therapist at that time. But I gotta say, it was very difficult for me because there's so much resistance that came in for me. I almost had to ask him to sit down with me and help me to walk me through every step, because I said, Slava, I can't do it by myself. I can't. I just, if please help me, because if you don't, I'm just not, I can't. And he sat down with me and he really helped me, walk me through every step. But so yeah, when I was reading the book, I also found it very profound, and it explained in a simple ways that you can relate to and recognize in yourself that, oh yeah, this is really what I see, and this is really what I see in the society, and how we're handling grief in each other, and how we're not equipped to support each other, right? So I want to dive a little bit into that, because that is so important. I want to kind of open up a little bit take a dive into what grief is. What does it look like? If you don't process it, what does it look like in you? What kind of myth about grief we have, and how are we not equipped? How are we not supporting others, and how should we support others instead? So can we dive into all that? And
absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, and thanks for sharing. Yeah, the war in Ukraine is just crazy.
Yeah.
So grief, interestingly, most people think that grief only comes when you're bereaved, right? If someone dies, which for sure, or maybe divorce. People will say maybe you grieve over a divorce, you grieve over a death. But thanks to the Grief Recovery Institute, who sort of crystallized these definitions, grief is the normal and natural human response to loss of many kinds. So it's also, grief is the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So a move, a career change, the empty nest.
Divorce.
Divorce, absolutely. Loss of health, aging. And
loss of a pet.
Loss of a pet, which is very often the first real big loss that children experience, loss of a pet. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, anything like that, anything that's changing, that's significant and changing. So a move, a career. It's interesting. The first time I went through the grief recovery method, and I did my daughter, and I did not, I thought I was going to be, it was about this move I had just made, but it turned out to be about my daughter. That day I realized that I was working on this. The reason it didn't occur to me that the biggest knife in my heart at that moment, the biggest pain, had to do with my relationship with my daughter, who was leaving home, going to university, was because I didn't realize that grief is all about conflicting feelings too. And honestly, I felt so much better about our relationship at that point. We had had a difficult relationship when she was a teenager, mostly my fault, sorry to say, but we did. And it was much better now that she was out of the family home, okay, which I'm ashamed to say, but that's true. It was much better. And so I was so used to focusing on the good. This is better. So, but it masked the deep regret. I had so much regret that I just raced through because it was painful. That's how I was taught to deal with pain, unfortunately. And I respect and love my family of origin. They're very sweet people. I hope that they would all agree that our modus operandi, the way that we functioned, was if something is unpleasant, you put it under the rug. You do not address it head on, generally. So that's what I learned, right? You avoid, you don't address things head on. Why talk about unpleasant things? And I also understand a lot of that is the previous generation, and that was what they were taught, and that's well-intentioned, and I get that. It doesn't help though. Truth is what we need. We need truth and honesty to process any pain, any loss, any grief. And so, so.
Tammy, isn't it true? Correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be making it up. I think what it also is underlying loss of all of this possible loss that you're saying, a pet or a job or home or immigration or anything. Underneath that, there is a loss of who you are or who you were.
Totally.
When you were in that. So it's a loss of yourself, a part of yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're grieving as well, right? Or maybe for the most part, we're grieving the loss of a part of ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many, that's true. So many intangible losses. Sometimes people are in touch with a loss of idealism, a loss of childhood, a loss of safety, a loss of trust. Some people can identify a loss of trust say, with their parents already when they're 5 years old. You know, something happens between them and their parents and they decide, I can't trust you anymore. And that is horrible to have that happen so early, and it happens quite often. So that kind of thing, you know, a loss of a friendship, an estrangement, you know, bullying for children and teenagers, again, loss of safety, right? Loss of belonging, loss of community. This, again, the whole, you know, thing that you and I are so involved in, Ukrainian war, you know, loss of country, nationality, identity, all of that is huge.
Yeah, and even the smallest thing that you would think it's a small thing, but no, here you go. It's a little loss as well. And according to Grief Recovery, there is a bigger loss and a small loss, but it's all ultimately a loss, and it all piles up, right?
Yep. And that is a great point. Thanks for mentioning that. I think one of the reasons why we all get so stuck, to speak to the point of how do we generally deal in society, and it is cross-cultural, I think. I don't know if it's universal, but it's very, very common across cultures that we tend to compare and minimize losses, which doesn't help us, right? We stop ourselves from being honest about how upset we are, painful we are, because we go, well, that is ridiculous. That is nothing. We can always think of someone who's worse off than we are. And there is some nobility in that. There's some goodness in that. Absolutely. That's not always a terrible thing. But if I constantly do that, for example, today, personal thing today, silly. This is really silly. Okay. But see, if I tell myself that's so silly, I shouldn't feel that way, then I will deny myself, I'm not being honest, and I will deny myself the opportunity to face my pain and process my loss. And what do I wind up doing? I just kind of stick it in this backpack that I'm carrying of all my experiences, and it sits there unprocessed, and it's this weight. And maybe it's a little weight, maybe it's just a little rock, but it sits there, and I keep adding and adding. And as you were saying, the straw that broke the camel's back was, for you, the war. We've got this huge, by the time we're adults, we've got this huge weight on our back, and it just takes one thing. For me this morning, I was aware of a little one where, as I'm deciding what earrings to wear today, right? I'm here in my Ukrainian apartment. I look at my assortment of jewelry, which to me, some of it, you know, I don't have any expensive jewelry hardly ever at all. It's all costume jewelry, but a lot of it is precious to me, and a lot of it is from Russia, because I lived in Russia for many years. So I'm looking at it all today going, I can't wear that. It's Russian. I can't wear that. It's Russian. I can't wear that. Because I can't. People will see. It's very distinctive, right? People will see that's Russian. And it's political all of a sudden. What earring I choose to wear is suddenly a political statement. And I feel a loss. It hurts my heart. Right. And what happens is, as soon as you say something like that, it's like, well, that's nothing compared to, my neighbor has lost her husband on the front. There's no right for me to even give a second's thought to what earrings I'm going to wear. That's crazy. But see, that's how we do that to bigger and bigger and bigger rocks in our backpack. And pretty soon we strip ourselves and rob ourselves of our humanity and our dignity. And we're carrying all this stuff that just honestly, I need to deal with. For me, that's a big deal. Every loss is experienced at 100%. So comparing, of course, it's nothing. On one hand, it's nothing like my neighbor losing her husband on the front. Nothing. I agree. But apart from that, by myself, I have to be honest and say, but it's sad to me that all these things that mean something to me, and recall personal relationships, people that gave me these things, I can't ever wear them in the near foreseeable future. It's just, it's sad. And that's all. It's sad. So how do we, go ahead.
So a healthy way to process that, however big or small it is to acknowledge it, right?
Yes.
And
yes,
to
ma'am.
sit in it and to give it space to live it.
Exactly right.
And so would it be true to say that it piles up into the backpack of the stones that we carry of the grief when we don't want to feel it, and we say, oh no, it's not important. So
Exactly.
that brings us to the myth, right? Some of the myths
Yes.
about the grief. Can you
Lots
touch
of,
on
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
please?
Well, there's a number of them, and we learn them from very well-meaning people in our lives that pass on as the best they knew how they were taught to deal with trauma and grief and loss. For example, my father died when I was 12, and I remember coming into the house right after it happened, and my mother was wailing, crying really loudly in the bedroom. I looked up at my uncle who was standing in the doorway, and I said, what do I do? In my heart, I wanted to go to her, but I was also scared to go to her, right? It felt very uncomfortable. So I needed guidance. I looked to my uncle and I said, what do I do? And he said, leave her alone. Your mother just needs to be alone right now. And so now he did not tell me, this is your rule for life forever and ever. Whenever someone is sad, leave them alone. But I understood, okay, when people are really upset, leave them alone. And so what wound up happening was I learned grieve alone. And now everybody should grieve alone a little bit, right? A little bit of that is good and appropriate and necessary. But where I took it too far, and most people do because it's uncomfortable, my mother and I never talked with each other about how we felt about losing my father. I never asked her, what is it like for you? You're a widow now. How are you feel? I was afraid. I never did. I thought, oh, I shouldn't go there. I need to let her grieve alone. Again, that's my responsibility, that's what I understood, but it's almost universal that people get that because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. After my father died, I watched my mom. Now, I wasn't aware that I was observing and imitating. It kind of happened, I think, automatically. I watched my mom cope with my father's death. She became extremely busy. Some nights she wouldn't go to bed till 4 or 5 in the morning. What was she doing? Tidying drawers, mending clothes that nobody ever wore or needs to wear that had been accumulating in the basement. I mean, she found just anything to occupy her mind, her fingers, her time, just so she doesn't have to stop and think about how she feels. And that is how I lived my life too. Constantly new relationships, constantly new ideas, new projects, new things, new stuff, so busy all the time, so that you can't stop, you don't stop and think. And it's only in the last few years that I started to process some of my backpack of unprocessed stuff that I don't feel like I have to do that anymore. But for decades, that's how I lived my life. Keeping busy is another myth. Just keep busy, just distract yourself. Which again, good thing to do for a time, of course. But if you stay in that mode and you never look your pain in the face and process it, as you said earlier, you will hit the wall one day and you will cease to function because this backpack becomes so heavy at some point. It is life limiting.
And so what are some of the other myths that we can become aware of,
Well,
so we can recognize in ourselves that, oh my God, maybe that's my sign that I need something to process.
Yeah, well, a real deep one for most of us is just wanting immediately to comfort and fix and provide relief. So we tell one another, don't feel bad. And then we follow it with some kind of rational statement. For example, I come from a Christian faith community, right? So what we do to each other, again, with the best motives, but this is not helpful for a griever. We will say to one another, if we hear of some terrible thing, we'll say generally, don't feel bad. God never gives you more than you can bear. That is not helpful though to people, because the thought is, well, I don't like God very much then, because I cannot bear this. If God thinks I can bear this, then I don't like God, and he doesn't understand me and I don't understand him. And so in a very small number of cases that can be a comfort, but overall, what I hear from people most of all those intellectual statements that may be true for your faith or whatever are not helpful. Another example of that is, let's say someone has had a miscarriage or lost a child, God forbid. That's terrible, terrible thing to have happen to so many people. And what well-meaning people can say is, don't feel bad. You're still young. You can try again. Or don't feel bad. At least you have another child. And it lands so hollow. It does nothing to acknowledge. But I'm brokenhearted here. If you say don't feel bad, you're telling me don't feel the way I feel. I should feel the way I feel. Shouldn't I? I mean, I loved my child and now my child is gone. Shouldn't I feel sad? Shouldn't I feel brokenhearted? Of course I should. Why are you telling me don't feel bad? And the shocking truth is that usually that comes from a place, it's not intentional, but usually it comes from a place where, if it's you and I having this discussion, I have this huge pile of pain and grief that's already up to here. You come to me and tell me about your child that died. I can't handle it because I'm already up to here. And so I got to tell you, oh, don't feel bad. But it's about me, really. I am not able to hold space for you. And I'm unaware that I'm so weighed down. And so all I can do is just try to say to you, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. It'll be okay. Now, that's a beautiful thing to say, but later. I'm learning that it's so important to separate those conversations. People do need hope. Of course you need hope that there is a brighter future. Of course you do. But to try to do all of that in the same conversation when someone is expressing their raw pain, that is very wrong, not helpful. They can probably hear that at another time and need to hear it at another time, but to try to do that all at once is counterproductive.
So what would be, okay, no, before we go to that question, what would it look like if somebody's caring too much? I know there are specific like psychological things that start happening, maybe physiological things that starts happening.
Sure.
How does one recognize that, that they're carrying a bit much grief, maybe?
There's a lot of ways, actually, a lot of ways. And once you start to identify what grief really is, essentially, another definition we didn't touch on yet is anytime something important happens that you really wish had been different or better or more, right? It's so universal. I walk down the street and I feel like everybody's grieving. Everybody is grieving something. And you can't unsee that once you see it. So some of the signs might be, we talk about a great metaphor of, again, the backpack is one, but another one is a tea kettle. You have like a gas fire maybe, or an electric burner underneath your tea kettle, and it heats up, and so the pressure builds inside the tea kettle. And then some of them have a spout where it whistles or something, and steam is let out. So anytime we are distressed, under stress because of something important that we wish had been different, better, or more, traumatized by something, upset by something, preoccupied by something, we could say there's a lot of emotional energy around that person, event, disappointment, desire, unmet hope or dream, emotional energy, kind of like what's going on inside that tea kettle when the fire's up, right? If we have a stopper in the spout, which could be those myths, right? Oh, I'm just going to keep busy, or I'm just going to tell myself don't feel bad, or I'm just going to, replace the loss is another myth. I'm just going to go, get another dog. My dog died, I'll go get another dog. And we don't really deal with the source, with what's really going on. Eventually, all that pressure is going to have to release some way. It either goes out or it will implode. It'll explode or it'll implode. So some signs might be dis-ease in the body, disease in the body, right? I mean, that works in English. It doesn't always work in other languages, but I mean, one of my trainers in grief recovery was a public health expert. And she wrote on the wall this massive long list. Actually, the class came up with it. You know, what are some ways grief, undealt with grief, unprocessed grief, can manifest in the body? And we came up with, you might imagine, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, high blood pressure, headaches, migraines, psoriasis, allergies. Yes, I mean, all sorts of things. Now, I'm not saying that every physical ailment is because a person is grieving. I'm not saying that. But almost everything can be. It's possible. It needs to be investigated. If it's just grief. It's just a normal and natural reaction. The other way it can go is out. So sometimes you may know people who use humor as kind of a way to release some stress. They
Hi.
And that's beautiful. And it's beautiful. I mean, humor is great, right? As long as it's not offensive to someone, it's a great release. And to be honest, there are lots of healthy ways we can take the temperature down a little bit, release, open that spout in the tea kettle and release some stress a little bit, exercise. Watching,
breathe,
yeah, yoga,
go in nature.
Go in nature. There's so many good things we can do. And there's some bad things we can do, right? Drugs, alcohol, turning to food for medication. We're trained to do that from a very early age. Oh, you're sad, here, have a cookie. Let's go have a sweet. Let me take you out for dinner. I'll make you feel better. And that's lovely. I just want to kick back and watch my favorite show. That's great too. There's nothing wrong with that. The only time that becomes bad is when, again, like with the myths, right? Sometimes you have to be strong, for example, for other people. You have to be busy. You have to, take care of things. If you have responsibilities, you have to do that. But if I never look my grief in the face and I have no answers for what do I do with it when I look at it in the face, that was my situation, then you're going to continue to run. You're going to continue to put the stopper in the kettle. You're going to continue to use these, we call them short-term energy relieving behaviors, which can be very positive, like education. I know some people that are perpetual students. That's beautiful. It's great. They're learning. It's edifying. And they're running away from pain. They're masking their pain with busyness, with another endeavor, which is very good and very positive. And at the same time, they are not dealing with the fire that's causing all this pressure to build up. Gardening, travel, all sorts of lovely things, sex, pornography, masturbation. These are all things that can provide relief, and they are more or less harmful, right? They more or less addictive, depending on what you turn to. So you can observe someone may be grieving if you notice they are exhibiting some of these behaviors, addictions, dependencies on certain things, compulsive behaviors, always traveling, always, always another course, always in the gym, can't sit still. And obviously we regard this with tremendous compassion and without judgment, because we all to some extent do this, and we need to do this because it's a coping mechanism. It's the way we survive. And I think I'm pretty typical. I had no idea what else to do. Nobody gave me the tools. So sometimes people think, and you touched on it, that it's so important to acknowledge and speak, give voice to what I'm feeling. But that is not the only thing that leads to completion of grief and processing that pile of rocks. It's an essential step, but that by itself is not the path that we have to walk. It's a step that's essential, but that won't bring us the whole way. It'll get us going though, for sure.
You just made me realize something huge, Tammy. For many years, it's been a mystery to me. I'm a huge cat. I love cats. I love, love, love cats. I used to have them, but for some mystical reason, um, they only lived for a couple years and they died. So I lost quite a few cats. And what I did to cope with it, like you said, I replaced it with a new one.
Yep.
Oh, my
Right.
cat died. I'm gonna get a new one. My cat died. I'm gonna get a new one. And then I've developed an allergy to cats. And
Oh
I
my
couldn't
goodness.
figure out for the longest time how is that. I was telling everybody it's the biggest tragedy of my life. Obviously, I'm over exaggerating,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I said it's the biggest tragedy of my. I love cats. I want to have a cat, and I'm allergic. I can't be around them, and I couldn't figure out why. And you just made me see this. That's how it manifested. It manifested
Yeah.
into an allergy. So it was the way of my body saying, no, you're not getting any more cats until you are processing the grief of your previous cats.
You know, you're so, and yet I know some people will hear that and they'll go, "Oh, don't be ridiculous." But this is the compare and minimize danger again, right? If we say, "Oh, it's just a cat," we are not acknowledging the way we are created, the way we are built. There is an attachment that happens that is just as legitimate in the brain. It's the exact same activity in the brain that happens when you attach to a human relationship. It is a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And when it is lost, there is trauma, there is grief. And you're exactly right. We tend to replace things like that and minimize and say, oh, it's just a cat.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're stuck with the pain because it doesn't ever complete. You're so right. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is profound. Profound.
I am just mind blown. I just really, I was looking for the answer to that question for the longest time.
It's
How
profound.
come? Oh my God, I'm so glad. So now I know what to attack so that I can have a cat again.
Yeah, you're
Oh
right.
my
You're right.
God.
You're right. And I hope that it clears up. I
Yeah.
really do. I think there's a great chance that it will.
The other part of it is that you touched on the emotional attachment and the relationship that we're losing. But also, again, it's how you felt who you were when this whatever was in your life.
Yes,
And
you're
it's
right.
still for the big part, it's the loss of that. Maybe that cat, for some people, that the cat or that dog or that whatever pet can be the most intimate relationship in their life, because
Absolutely. Yeah.
maybe they can be, maybe that's the only creature, a living creature, living being that they can be really entirely themselves around, really authentic and free around. And then so for at the loss of that relationship, they're losing they're losing the whole part of themselves where they felt free and themselves and just comfortable and happy. So it's important to say, well, on the one side, oh, yeah, well, get over it, you lost a cat, somebody lost a husband, yeah, I'm so sorry,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I lost a part of myself.
Yes.
And so that's a huge one.
Yeah.
A huge one.
Yeah.
Tammy, I would like to touch on now, how do we, so we touched on all these unhelpful ways in supporting
Yeah.
each other. The book says so that we are is that correct to say, poor equipped, ill-equipped?
Yeah, ill-equipped. Yeah.
Ill-equipped to support
We
each
are.
other's grievingness.
Yeah.
So what is it? What are the do's and don'ts?
Oh, such a great question. Such a great question. Thanks for asking. Well, again, this is almost universal. So often, we will ask someone who we clearly think is grieving, and most often this is someone's had a death. And so we will ask them, is there anything I can do? Do you need anything? The answer will always be no. because it's impossible for them to think. They're going to say no. It doesn't mean that's what they mean. They actually need the opposite. They really need for us to show up what they need. They're afraid, they're hurting, they're grieving. What they desperately need is to talk about what happened, but in a safe place. I've made this mistake, I'm so sorry to say, knowing that this is a good thing to do. Sometimes I have not been as careful as I need to be about the environment. I've been so concerned about, getting it right. And okay, it's uncomfortable for everybody. I got to go there and say, what happened? And give you a chance to talk. But I'm not aware sometimes of this. Is this person really safe in the surroundings to be able to sit down and tell me what happened and maybe break down and cry? Are there people around? They're going to feel, are we in a cafe? Are they going to feel, embarrassed to cry? That's not very sensitive on my part. So I have to find the place that's private, create that space, show up, and then be able to say, so tell me what happened. Even if it's the most scary, awful thing, someone you love, and I'm so sorry, I hope this doesn't upset anyone, but this happens. This just happened last week to a family close to me. Someone dies by suicide, completely unexpected. And, even, the final images that the family has of this loved one are terrible.
Yeah.
Who wants to go say what happened? But that's what we must do. We must do in a safe place, because they have to talk about it. And that, as I said earlier, that's not the end game, but it's an essential part. It's an essential part. So somehow creating opportunities where we can show up, and not just once. Sometimes people will show up really well. If there's a bereavement around the time of the funeral, there's a lot of gatherings, there's a lot of support, there is discussion, there's space to reminisce and talk about the person you've lost and your experiences and your memories and how you feel, and that's great. Funeral ends, everybody disappears. But we're not done. We're not done. I actually love the Slavic tradition of, they have, when someone dies, there's a 10-day gathering, there's a 40-day gathering, there's a 100-day gathering, there's an annual gathering. That is so wise. It's so wise, because it gives people the opportunity to talk about their feelings, which is so important. So that's one thing, not avoiding the person, because grievers will isolate. They will isolate. And often the people supporting them kind of isolate too. And that's the worst thing we could do. What we need to do is lean in and show up.
And then are there other things what should we not do? Okay, so we shouldn't force on, let's talk about it now, right? Let's fix your problem now.
No,
because there is no problem.
That's
and
right.
Is there anything else we didn't mention?
Well, I would say, we talked about not comparing or minimizing, right? It is so hurtful when we try to comfort or fix. So really the most appropriate thing to say when someone starts, if we can get them to start talking about it, no matter how horrible it is, we should resist the temptation to fix or minimize or comfort. We should just say, thank you for sharing that. And leave it there. Leave it there. Just leave it there. Leave it there. It's so hard. I struggle with this myself, especially with my grown kids. That myth, it's okay, it'll be okay. It just wants to come out of my, don't feel bad, it'll be okay. It's so
your neighbor just had something worse happen to him. Your thing is nothing.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. You just want to make it better.
Yeah. And you're making it worse.
You are. It doesn't help. So holding back on all of those sort of rational facts, that may be true. Tomorrow's another day. It'll get easier as time goes on. You'll feel better. Well, that's another myth, by the way, that time by itself will heal. Time by
Mm.
itself does nothing to heal. It's what
Mhm.
we do with the time that will heal. But anyway, there's such a temptation to say those things. And really, we should hold our tongue. The other thing that we can do sometimes, again, in an effort to, I think, empathize, sympathize, it is very good to sort of normalize someone's experience and say something like, if in fact we do have a similar experience, just to touch on it, I lost my mother too. Or if it's true, obviously it has to be true. It can't ever, it will never comfort anyone well or offer support well if we bend the truth to try to be sympathetic. That never helps. It has to be real and authentic. But I might say, let's say if you lost your mom and you were grieving over that, I might appropriately say, oh, I am so sorry to hear this. I also lost my mom. But then I've got to stop. I cannot launch into my story, because then I am story stealing. This is your spotlight. This is for you. And it might help you to know, oh, here's a person who also has had a similar loss. But it ends there, because I don't know what your relationship with your mother was like. You don't know what my relationship with my mother was like. We should not be comparing here. So, you just dealt with someone who died by suicide. I have experienced that too. I might only say that I have experienced that. It's horrible to say, I know how you feel, because we don't know how you feel. I have no idea how you feel. You have no idea how I feel. So that is not helpful. I know how you feel. That just, pushes someone away. Like, okay, great. You don't want to listen to me. You already know.
Sadly, it's such a normality in our society. I see it in myself all the time, and sometimes I can see it, and the other times I don't. When we talk about it, obviously, I can say, "Oh my God, yeah, I do that. I do that. I do that."
Yeah.
So,
It's
but
so natural. So natural.
yeah, these are the learned patterns that are widely accepted in the society as normality, and it's a myth.
Yeah. Sometimes it's so funny. In my grief recovery groups, we go through these myths, time heals, replace the loss, don't feel bad, grieve alone. And there's one more, I can't remember. But anyway, we go through these 5, 6 myths. And sometimes I have people say to me, I thought this is what we're supposed to do. But this is all I have. If you take this away from me, what do we have? And that's exactly right. I mean, what do we have? We have no answers, but that's what we've been taught. That's the only thing we have. So it's completely understandable that we're stuck, because the tools we've been given don't complete. They don't bring us to the end.
Yeah, and so we obviously start with ourselves and understand that, okay, whatever my reaction to their grief is speaks more about me and my baggage than it does about them. So it seems as though logical, the more I free myself from the stones, the better support I am for other people in grief. The more I get rid of the need to fix anything, and I get healthy tools to process the actual trauma, grief, the better support I am, the safer space I can create for others to allow them this safe healing space.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. I'll tell you an amazing example of that in my own life. Before I told you I've done 14 times through this method, right? With different relationships and different people.
Oh my God, that's a lot.
Yeah, some of my colleagues have done 60, 70, 80 relationships.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's incredible.
It's quite a process.
It is. And in the book, the first time, the second time you go through it, it can take, the course is 8 weeks, right? But it doesn't take 8 weeks. to process a relationship. You can do it in a matter of a few hours, really, if you have the tools at your hand. But anyway, a few years ago, I noticed a real difference. I used to feel so incensed and disturbed and upset and bothered deeply when I would see on social media, say, what I consider to be an inappropriate conversation that goes on. I'm sure people are triggered by different things. I'm sure you can relate, and your listeners can relate. Social media is a wonderful thing. And then there are times when you just, how dare somebody say that or do that or react that way, whatever. And it used to drive me crazy. And interestingly, since doing all this work, the same thing can happen now. And I feel like I am present. I'm able to be present and experience. I still feel sometimes very sad or disappointed. I can feel angry or mostly disappointed. Sometimes when I see an interaction that I just don't feel like is productive, I feel like it's hurtful. And there's nothing I can do. It's not appropriate for me to engage. It's just sad. I feel so encouraged because I feel like I'm able to be present and kind of experience it and live it, but it doesn't consume me. I don't walk away and lose sleep over it like I used to. It doesn't consume my every breathing moment like it used to. So that is a real tangible relief and evidence of, yes, you take your temperature down when you start processing all these unprocessed natural things that happen to all of us. And no, grievers are not broken. They're just grieving. Everybody's got it to one extent or another, greater or lesser extent. If we can just work on that, we will be so much more equipped to hold space for one another calmly and not feel this pressure to fix, control, meddle, but we can be, a safe place and a listening ear. And then perhaps if it's needed, a counselor, an advisor, a coach, a friend, if that's appropriate. But the first step has got to be a safe place where I'm not judging you, I'm not analyzing you, I'm not criticizing you. I am simply holding space for you to explore your pain and give voice to it.
Thank you, Tammy. And should our viewer resonate with the grief recovery method, where can they go to look for a therapist, or perhaps how can they find you, or what do they need?
So
tell
easy,
us.
Yeah. And I do want to just say, in the grief recovery method, we don't call ourselves therapists intentionally because the thought is, because grief is a normal and natural part of life, the thought is that this is positioned not as therapy, though it is therapeutic, but it's not positioned as therapy, because the idea is that everyone should have this education, and that because it's normal and natural, we shouldn't need a therapist or a psychologist, a mental health professional. It's not a mental illness to experience grief. It's normal. And so this is an equipping. The idea is that we're equipping one another for normal life. Kind of like we ought to all learn about nutrition, to be able to feed ourselves well. This is sort of a similar thing where we ought to just learn. So we call ourselves specialists, not because, for example, I am not a regulated psychologist, psychiatrist. I do not have a medical degree. I do not have a degree in psychology or psychiatry. I simply have training in the area of grief and loss and how to recover. So the way to connect is very simple. There's a website. Maybe you can put it in your, in your show notes or however you do it. Yeah, but www.griefrecoverymethod.com, and that will lead you. There are grief recovery specialists, 6,000 or 7,000 all over the world. Very accessible. And you can also just buy the book, the Grief Recovery Handbook, and soon available in Ukrainian, now available in Russian, and in about 40 other languages. And you can just go through the process yourself, but you must take the action steps in the handbook. You can't just read it and intellectually, because as we've said, it's not just about giving voice to the pain. Then the completion comes in actually walking the path of forgiveness, which people so misunderstand forgiveness. And I'm sure we don't have time to get into all the nuances of forgiveness right now, but just so that viewers know, beyond just being able to be open and honest about how I feel about something, I've got to take responsibility for how I experience this loss, which involves forgiveness, either toward myself or toward someone who has caused me pain or an event that has caused me pain. And it is that is sort of the final step, is forgiveness and an honest expression of my emotions. So it takes a little work for people to get in touch with their emotions. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but sometimes we can be open or honest about all the facts and the circumstances about what's happened to me, but say nothing about how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
That just keeps us stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So some of us have to learn how to get out of the head and down into the heart and express, to a greater or lesser extent, we can be, out of touch with our emotions, and really have to spend some time to figure out, what do I really actually feel, and then complete my feelings with forgiveness. I forgive myself. I forgive you. I forgive that. I forgive them. And
it seems like that final step of letting go. Okay, I am done with this in a healthy, beautiful way. I am done with this.
Yes.
I forgive me, I forgive you, and I let you go with peace and love.
Yes. And it is a continual path, because in some cases you might be living with this continual pain, right? Some people have to live with an abuser. And how do you do that then? How do you get complete when every day you're being triggered? Every day you're being, that pressure is building every day. And it's just walking the path again. It's every day the same. And it doesn't take, 8 weeks. You can do it quickly, but it's, here's what I'm feeling. And not necessarily to the person. Of course, it would be so dangerous to go talk to an abuser and try to have a conversation like this. But somewhere in some safe space, I've got to be able to express, this is going on. I feel humiliated. I feel shame. I feel angry. I feel heartbroken. I feel confused. I feel lost. I feel betrayed. Whatever it is I feel. And I forgive this. I forgive this. And I might have to say it 5 times today. I might have to say it tomorrow. I might have to say it the next day. I keep walking this path, and I'm freed. I'm free. I'm not carrying it. As you said so beautifully, I'm leaving this. I am releasing it. I am letting it go in peace. Yeah, out it goes. Taking it out, I'm looking at it. I feel ashamed. I feel betrayed. I feel hurt. And I release this pain. I release this pain.
The other, you touched on it briefly, but I feel like it's a very important process. Well, in my process of grief recovery, when I did it with Slava, it was nearly 2 years ago. One of the hardest part for me, well, before you come to forgiveness, there's a step that's taking accountability for your part. Really honestly look back on yourself and see, what have I contributed, because it takes 2 to tango always, right?
Yeah.
So when you're in that state of hurting from the loss, from the grief, from whatever it is that you're going through, your mind just want to go into the pain that I feel and that has been inflicted on me. That's how we look at it often, right? And then we often overlook, what's our part in it?
Yeah.
Where have I, may I showed up in the way that's contributed to this situation? That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Really
but without this one, you cannot reach the forgiveness.
You're so right. You're so right. Yeah, it is a deep, deep truth, and it's a hard one, that I am responsible for every feeling that I have. No one can make me feel anything. Hence my experience with the social media, right? Mm-hmm. It was not anyone's fault out there in the social media world that caused me all the distress that I felt. It was me. Mm-hmm. And I needed to take responsibility for how I am handling all of that out there.
That's a very hard pill to swallow.
It's a very hard pill to swallow, but it's so relieving when we can do that, mm-hmm. because it's like we get back control. When we are triggered, we feel like the victim, mm-hmm. right? Like I'm helpless. I have no power over this. And this happens a lot. And it's a very sensitive subject. This happens a lot with racism, where and many other things, where we get political discussions, we get so triggered, and all we can see is this condition that I cannot change affects me so profoundly. I'm powerless, I'm helpless. But actually, it is so empowering if we can figure it out, that, yeah, it's still tragic. It's still awful. It doesn't make it okay. The fact that we actually learn to deal with our pain and take responsibility, as you're suggesting, doesn't make all of that awfulness okay. No. But it does free me, mm-hmm. from being constantly triggered and constantly set off by other people's mess.
And in the end, realizing I am the one who's hurting. They might not care about it. I can't make them feel anything unless they give me the power to affect them in this way, right?
Profoundly true. Profoundly true.
Yeah. Well, it's a very beautiful, complicated, necessary journey.
True.
From grieving to forgiveness and releasing and becoming free and light and loving and alive. Tammy, thank you so much. The last question I love to ask all of my guests is, what is your message to the world?
Oh, wow. What a great question. What is my message to the world? Woo, so profound. I guess I would say the Lord is God. Jesus Christ is the Lord. He is God. He is healer. He is deliverer. He is delight. He is our meaning. He is our joy. He is our purpose. But that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, maybe for another time.
Yeah, maybe for another time. Yep.
Beautiful. Yeah. Tammy,
thank you so
much.
And you. Thank you so much for exploring this theme with me and spending time with me.
I think it's a very important theme, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. Thanks, you Martha. So much for taking time and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Lots of love.
Lots of love.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Love M Podcast. If you found it valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more content on personal well-being. Stay blessed. I love you.